Yeah, I mean, Jenny, we've known each other for a long time, but I thought I'd introduce you this morning. And then for those who joined early, you would have heard me saying Janie's now a best-selling author, but
Who
yeah, let's
knew?
celebrate that one. But, in terms of Janie's background, after a career in performing in theatre and TV, from about 1997, Janie moved into working with leaders and groups in corporates, and really focusing on empowering clients to create presence and increase their communication capability, so they're being able to communicate with impact. And Janie, we met a long time ago, if you remember. So I've known about you for a long time, and obviously we've worked together for many years now. And I was really keen today to bring you into a conversation about your new book, The Listening Shift. And I know we've got a group of there you go. There's a group. There's the book there.
Here's one I prepared earlier.
Yeah. So there's many coaches and facilitators, etc., online listening today, and it's I suppose it's a key capability that we've all been developing since we were born, really, in terms of our capacity to listen. So my intention for this session is to have a number of questions and conversations around your book, but also, as I said earlier, if people have got questions, please do drop them into the panel. But just anything you'd like to say to the group before we get going, Janie?
Oh, just, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, really, because, you guys will have all trained long and hard in your capacity to listen and communicate and tease out excellence in your clients. So I think my heart rate's gone up a little bit in case you're sitting there thinking, what the hell is she talking about? But I welcome your thoughts.
And I suppose if I think back to recent years, Janie, as we've been working together, we've had a number of conversations about your experiences as a Samaritan, and even their quite simple framework in such a way, but their listening will, etc. And I suppose the first question I have for you is just really, what was the inspiration for you to go and research and speak to the contributors that you interviewed and then create the book? So what was the inspiration?
My contributors, including the very wonderful Damion. Well, I mean, maybe it's my age, Damion, but what I noticed is that I've spent the last 20 years working with leaders on creating presence, which was actually all about how do you make people listen to you? How do you command a room? How do you develop confidence to interrupt at a noisy meeting and get people's attention? And that, I mean, certainly when I started working in organizations, that was the real focus of presence. How do we all become a bit more like the American president of the USA, obviously. And over time, it's frustrated me greatly, actually, because particularly working with you, I know we're very different, but actually I'm fully aware of the commanding nature and strength in silence and stillness. And I would be lying if Samaritans hadn't inspired me, but I was drawn to Samaritans because I'm fascinated by people and their stories, and I'm hugely drawn to understand why people do what they do. But actually, I'm a fixer. I wanted to make a difference, and so what was interesting for me about training as a Samaritan was actually learning just to listen. And I do think actually a lot of the coaches that I've met also are fixers. We want to help. We want to make a difference to people. We want to help move them forward. And that's quite a distinct thing from just listening. So I found that incredibly liberating. And then, I just I sat down early on in lockdown, was writing about it. Suddenly thought maybe there's something in this. Maybe I should write the book that I've always been talking about writing. But actually, it's not just about listening, because, of course, my life has been so much about projecting ourselves. It's also, how do you help people listen? So rather than kind of forcing, it's the sense of collaborating together. with a starting place of listening. But as you can hear, my God, I can talk. So it's, you know,
I can see Peter's just put the link to your book up on the chat panel, which I'm sure you'll appreciate. So,
really do.
So thinking about the book, and I mean, there's so many different aspects of listening that you've covered and reflected on. But if there were some key insights, we're coaches, so let's name it down to three. If there were three key insights that you really took from, you know, the research that you did, what would you like to share?
I think particularly what struck me very early on, and of course this doesn't apply to your coaches because I know how thoroughly you reflect on listening, but actually, you know, as a society, we aren't really taught how to listen. You know, my mother was a great listener, and so I was always listened to, but no one ever explained to me how to do it. So I think there's an imperative: listen to me. You know, we've got to listen and all that stuff, but I actually don't really know how. And I think that's a huge problem in organizations working with leaders, because we want people to listen to us, but we don't help them do it very well. So I would say that's number one, is a bit against us. The other thing that I have really, you know, both writing about and as a Samaritan and in my work is, you know, I'm quick to judge. And I was like this as an actress as well. You know, you're trying to get under the skin of somebody and understand their motivations. I can make a very fast opinion. And I suspect we're all very similar, because we kind of animal trying to work out, I trust this person, do I like this person? So I really had to work much harder than I ever thought I would at not judging. So, you know, we don't get taught, we judge. And also the other thing is, I think we should try more to balance the conversation. I think, you know, a lot of the conversations that I have, I'm aware, you won't be able to tell from this one, but, you know, I'm always trying to make sure that there's equity, because there's often one person hijacking it. I talk in the book about switching, you know, I went to Spain last week on holiday. Oh, you went to Spain? I went to Portugal. Portugal is amazing. And we stayed in a hotel and I took my family, and you know, so there's a sort of narcissism about, I want to tell you about me. That happens a lot.
And again, I suppose I make links to presence as you name those aspects. So I suppose, how is this influencing your work with leaders now on presence? So I'm imagining there's some coaches here who are working with leaders, wanting to help them develop their listening capacity to be present. So yeah. How is this influencing your work, Janie?
Well, it's making me a lot more, strangely, a lot more empathetic, and in some degrees sympathetic, because I think particularly since we've been online, there's an awful lot of pressure and stress on people, and connection is much harder. So I feel like an awful lot of the leaders I'm working with, you know, there is a huge pressure to come up with solutions. And so my view is that they are listening to solve. They are waiting until they can make the point that needs to be heard. So I don't feel like I can be too foot stamping about it, but it's just the principle of suggesting to leaders, how would it be if they were a sounding board rather than a solution board, you know, rather than feeling that pressure to sort everything out. What would it be like to just sit with it? And I think that's agony for people, actually. I think that's really hard when, you know, particularly when leaders feel like they're paid to achieve results. That means that they've got to have the answers. And I would love it if as a society we could move away from this kind of big man idea that one person's got all the answers, because I just think it's time for us to realize that's not the case. So working with the leaders that I'm working with, I'm really trying to encourage them to sort of sit back and go, you talk to me, because I don't know what the answer is.
And I know we've touched on this before, but obviously, you know, silent is the use of the word, the letters in listen, isn't it? It's the same letters and the same as lets in terms of that space it creates. And as you're talking there, it sort of obviously makes quite a few links to our work with leaders around coaching, you know, in terms of a capacity.
I mean, that's such a great point, Damion, because I don't know what everyone's experience is of working online, but I don't find that online is particularly conducive to silence, because I think people are overwhelmingly tempted to just get on with something else. I'm sort of looking down whilst I'm thinking and actually making notes about something else. You know, we don't know what's going on, and there are so many distractions. But actually, I think there's a sort of risk with silence. I had a radio interview on Saturday about the book, and the journalist was saying to me, you know, we call it dead space, you know, which I think is really interesting, because I think that is a perception of silence. It's dead space. Christ, what's happening? Nothing. But actually, there's so much happening in that, which I know you'll all be very familiar with.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, and again, I can see some notes coming up on the screen. For instance, Peter reflecting on Nancy Klein's work, you know, about the thinking space, and you know, I suppose has had quite a profound impact on coaching. So just how about if you just give us a sense of some other of the contributors in the book, in terms of just some other thoughts that you connected with from different perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, because I think you write a book that's fully of your own perspective, and that's, you know, people will choose to read that or not. But actually, I thought there are so many people out there who are experts in listening, even though they wouldn't necessarily describe them as listeners. So, you know, I had the privilege of interviewing a wonderful young doctor called Rachel Mason, who, I mean, I can't imagine how we teach young people in 8 minutes to listen to a presenting issue and find what lies beneath it, and have the confidence to develop the conversation because you have an instinct that there's something further or deeper there to explore. So that was fascinating. I interviewed the most amazing choreographer, because later in the book, when I'm talking about helping other people listen to you, I'm very interested in how we set the scene. And I know, again, as coaches, you think about the environment, how can you create something where people will open up? She was so fascinating, Damion, because she said often she has to choreograph choruses of 80 people, and she's never met them. And she said to establish trust and confidence in her immediately, before she arrives at rehearsal, she learns everybody's name, but connected to a picture. She'll have pictures of everybody and she will learn their name. And so from the get-go in the morning, she will look someone in the eye and say, Damion, I'd like you to take 5 people over there. But, you know, and I was so impressed by the effort that she put in to that. Your own contribution, of course, which was so marvelous, talking about how we find that space in ourselves to allow others to speak. And there was parallels there with a guy called Ben Yeager, who's a conflict specialist who works in the West Bank and Israel. He's an ex-Israeli soldier. Really fascinating how he talks about the kind of rush, you know, people in urgency to kind of participate or contribute. And actually his view was that we just need to slow right down. So it was a real honor to hear so many perspectives. You know, I interviewed a journalist, I interviewed a political speechwriter, I interviewed a voice coach, a Samaritan. I mean, I was just, it was just soaking it up. And it is fascinating what great perspectives people have.
Yeah, and again, I can see some comments going around about your book as well, so I can see Peter's now put that out there.
Peter, you're a dream. I want to take you.
So, and you can mention it at the end, Janie. But I suppose for coaches, then, because obviously our audience are many coaches. If there's one key thing they could do to ensure they're being heard, you know, because I'm just conscious that often we put so much focus on the client, but there are moments where we're contracting or we're reviewing the relationship, where it's really important that we're heard as a coach. What sort of advice would you give the people that are listening around being heard?
Oh God, I mean, there are so many things. I think one of the things that's really interesting, and it is my experience of having had the privilege of people like you setting up sessions at the front of a room, or is being relatable and being really prepared to open up and share a bit of a personal, low point maybe. Because I think there can be a huge pressure. There's often an air of expertise or an aura of composure around a coach because you'll have done so much work on yourself. And I think that can intimidate or remove or detach a bit. I don't know. I don't know if I can be like that or connect with that. So I think making ourselves relatable is really important. Relevance is really important. You might sometimes the language of sort of intellectual or academic approach to coaching, how do you turn it into something that's really helpful, that enables other people in. And then what I learned from the journalist, who was so great, what she said was, using someone else's voice very early on in any communication is so powerful, because that's where the relatability can also bring us to attention. So it's being human, really, isn't it? It's just kind of.
That sort of leads, so Ruth's just asked the question, does relatable also involve vulnerable, or is that too much?
Well, I'd be interested in your view on this, Damion, because I think, I guess it depends what we're trying to achieve from a group, isn't it? Because if you really want to, I attended a Samaritans conference a couple of weeks ago. We had two speakers, and one was an amazing guy called Josh Connolly. I don't know if any of you know him, but he grew up, his parents were alcoholics, and he works now in this whole world of resilience, but with quite a different view. It's not about bouncing back, it's really about being kind to yourself. And he was extremely, wow, it was painful to listen to him sharing. He was really vulnerable. And then there was another speaker who was relatable, because she kind of triumphed and she shared a bit, but she didn't want to go into too much, and she made it very much about us. So I think you've got to work your audience out. I would seek relatability rather than vulnerability, because I think vulnerability can make people very uncomfortable, but that might be the thing that's right. I don't think I could say.
Yeah, I suppose it comes back to intention, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of the purpose of you doing that. And Helen's just raised the question as well, what do you mean by using someone else's voice early on?
So it would be, for example, if you're in a room of 4 or 5 or 10 people, it might be that you pre-agree with them that you can directly quote from them. Before the workshop, Sarah said, I'm really nervous about this workshop, but actually I'm really excited to see how things unfold. So rather than a general, I think we'll have a great time, it's targeted. There's a voice in the room that you can use, or a voice from a previous workshop. Amal said, when they first started, they weren't sure how this was going to work out, but at the end they said it was the best day they've ever had. So my hope and intention is that things are the same for you. So it's you're kind of drawing in the voice of others to build a sense of confidence in your listener.
And again, without giving too much away from your book, I was just interested because you spoke about sort of some key areas when you spoke about your I suppose your key reflections from writing the book, such as non-judging, and I suppose again, just take that further down to a practical level. If there was something practically that a coach could share or do with a leader to really support them to create that sort of, whether it's non-judging or one of those other aspects you touched in on, Janie, what would you again reflect back?
I think definitely I would seek to explore with them how their perspectives on the other person might get in the way, because of course that's all that, I suppose, all the unconscious biases stuff that we really benefit from unpicking a little bit, because they can get in the way of our listening. I would also encourage, probably my big encouragement would be, how do you get a leader to literally clear their desk, clear their head, clear their mind, to be present? Because I think the addiction of picking up your phone or doing something else and being convinced that you can multitask and still listen, I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we've got, and has been exacerbated by being online. And I went to this session recently run by a social anthropologist who, I mean, this was new to me, but perhaps you're familiar with it. She called it Zoom IRL, which is Zoom in real life. And she said her research is showing that people are going to go back to the workplace and behave as if they're still online. So they're not connecting, everything is kind of here. I interact with the world like this. So we've really got to get people to get out there, to connect with each other again. But to do that, we must try to find enough headspace to be present.
Sorry, Joe, I just want to take back, because Tom asked if you could just say the name again of the resilience speaker that you mentioned.
Josh Connolly.
Okay,
he's
Josh
on LinkedIn. I mean, he's fantastic. Wow, really impactful. He does a lot now with the children of alcoholic parents. And
okay, so and again, just picking up on this piece around making someone comfortable with silence, because, you know, I often think as coaches we role model that, you know, in terms of us being able to hold a space so the coachee can really experience the benefits of that. But again, if you're working with a leader and that sort of sense of helping them be comfortable with being uncomfortable in silence, what are some of the things you might do with them?
Well, make them uncomfortable first off. I mean, and also make it very clear that that's part of their role, is to be uncomfortable, you know, because leaders are often asking other people to put themselves in those spaces where they don't feel comfortable. So I think that's the important thing. I also think it can be helpful to work with leaders on developing a kind of plan. You know, what kind of questions are you going to ask? Not, I don't mean a rigid interview, but when I was working with a leader the other day, he said, yeah, I've done a lot of work on listening. And I said to him, what resonates with you about how to listen? And he said, oh, you know, nodding and stuff. And he said he was worried about the mental health of his teams. And he said, but I've been working really hard at connecting with them. And I said, oh, so just share with me, you know, how might you start a conversation? He said, well, you know, I just say, how are you? And he said, they seem okay. So, you know, I haven't had to give it too much focus. But of course, how are you? Such a, you know, how are you? I'm good. How are you? Yeah, I'm good. Where are you going to go with that? So I was trying to help him think about alternatives to questions like, how are you, that might tease out a little bit more, you know, what's going on for you at the moment, or, you know, tell me a bit about your week. What have you found tough? What have you found great? You know, just a little bit more helpful in tone, because some of those, you all right?
Not bad.
Just, you know, they mean what they, I mean, I think the intention is really positive. His intention was to try and find out, but it's just too much, too throwaway.
Yeah, and you know, I'm conscious of time sort of against us for this conversation, but what's your hope? You know, you've written this book, you know, what are you hoping the impact will be for organizations or leaders, Janie?
I mean, this is not going to be a very popular thing to say, but my sense is, if we taught people well enough to ask good questions and to listen beautifully, it's almost like we as coaches would be out of a job. Do you know what I mean? I know that's that's many years down the line. But my hope, my sincere hope, is that certainly the organizations I work in, you work in, everyone here on the call works in, if we could start to teach listening properly, not just a kind of cursory 20 minutes in a, communication skills workshop, but actually really to develop people's skills as listeners as much as people are developed as speakers. How many presentation skills workshops are run in organizations versus how many listening skills workshops? I think you find a huge disparity. So it's my very sincere intention to try to help organizations think about the value of listening as much as they think about the value of talking. But I must tell you, with the PR that I've been fortunate to have around the book, I'd say a good 70% of requests are about the art of being heard. Can you write an article on how to be heard? Just people are like, yeah, listening's really important, but how can I get heard? And so I think I'll never be able to die because I'll just have to keep going with it. There's a lot to do.
Yeah, and just anything else I haven't asked you, Janie, that you would like to just share about the book, or just the research you did, or just around this whole art form of listening?
Well, I think what's really interesting is Nancy Klein's got a new book out. I can't remember what the title is, but it's basically about not interrupting, which I really appreciate, but I think is almost impossible. And what I learned from my own research was that there is a positive way of interrupting. So I found the research of a professor called Han Lee at the British University, Columbia, Canada, somewhere, and University of British Columbia, sorry. And she says there are what she calls disruptive interruptions, which are to shut people down. But she said there are also cooperative interruptions, which are to encourage, to celebrate, to agree, to help. And actually, I found, because I think I am an interrupter, I found that quite helpful, because I'm not forgiving myself for doing it, but actually sometimes people do talk too much. We have to be realistic. Sometimes people go on and on and on and they won't shut up. So I've noticed that if you can very positively, I think that's such a great point. Would you mind if we went back to what someone else was saying? And actually that tends to protect and support everybody in the room. And I think particularly as a woman, Marianne Siegert's new book, The Authority Gap, where she talks about women having to use humor and warmth to deflect hostility, and also as a methodology for breaking in. I think that kind of positive interruption I've found really actually very helpful.
Thank you, Janie. Thank you. And it goes back to what we discussed when you interviewed me about intentionality as well, which is where that takes me to. So I'm conscious we're at time. This is a very short sort of session, but just in terms of your book, where can people find it if they're interested?
Oh, you can find it on Amazon. You can also find it on Hive or ukbookshop.org, or from the publishers practicalinspiration.com.
Thanks, Janie. And just to say to everyone listening, our next webinar is going to be on the 12th of July at 1 o'clock. And I'm going to be talking to Caroline Brown and Emily Hutchinson about their new book called The Strengths-Based Organization, which is all about positive psychology in the organizational context. So thanks again, Janie. Thanks again for everybody joining, and hopefully see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Damion, for having me. Thank you, everybody.